first of all, a little bit about your background. Where are you originally from?
I was born and raised in Cleveland, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, and graduated high school and came here to Chicago to go to Northwestern University. And then the rest is history. I stayed in Chicago and taught school for about 3 or 4 years, and then married my husband and continued a life of volunteerism thereafter. And being a wife and mother, I might add.
You're active in so many things. Was there any particular interest in the natural sciences that led you to get involved with the field?
You know, I have to say honestly, no. I mean, I had the usual interest in animals and nature that anyone that has an opportunity to be in the out of doors and so on had. But I had no academic interest. I had no prior study interest or anything like that. But I believe it was in the early 70s, maybe, much earlier than that. This is the 40th anniversary this year of the Field Museum Women's Board, which was founded by Ellen Thorne Smith. And so I was asked to serve on the Women's Board, which my mother-in-law was on and an aunt was on, et cetera, et cetera. And I was happy to do that because the role of the Women's Board is to create interest in the museum and to raise money for the museum, et cetera. And so I kind of came onto it. But I believe so firmly that participation creates interest. Sometimes you follow your interest, but sometimes you blindly go into something and it becomes a passion. And I think that that's probably more the way I became so involved at the field. I had the opportunity to take on responsibility on the Women's Board. I subsequently chaired the Women's Board. And then as such, you become an ad hoc member of the Board of Trustees. And I was privileged then to be elected to the Board of Trustees over a period of time, and then lucky enough to be asked at a certain point to be the first woman chairman of the Board of Trustees. And people say, well, what do you think that means to the women's movement, et cetera, et cetera? And quite frankly, I never thought of it as a step forward for women. I believe that women should have every right that men do, just as most of us do in today's world. But to me, it was just an opportunity to lead, an opportunity to do something more creative with my volunteer life, to help the museum take the next step in excellence, and to be along for the ride of continuing to make us one of the 4 great natural history museums in the world, which we are and have been for many years.
Yeah, when you think about it, there's the Smithsonian, of course, right here in the middle of the country, the field.
And then there's the British Museum, and then there's the American Museum in New York. And those are the 4 great natural history museums worldwide. And when you think about it, there are, well, I don't know if there are hundreds, but there are certainly tens of fine art museums worldwide that we can name. But when there are only 4 museums with these disciplines in the world that can call themselves great, it's really a privilege to be allied with the Field Museum.
Well, there's so much more. As magnificent as the physical structure of the field is,
Yeah.
And there's so much going on right here within these hallways, there's much more than meets the eye here.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because the field is one of the preeminent museums of natural history in the world. It is also a thriving center for research and all that.
Absolutely.
Talk about that.
Well, we're doing research in something around 90 countries worldwide in areas of global warming and botany and geology and anthropology. And we have somewhere in, I don't know how many curators that are, most have joint appointments with our universities, UIC or University of Illinois or Chicago or Northwestern. And so they do their teaching and research in conjunction with those institutions. And then we have over 22 million artifacts in our collection, and only 1% of those artifacts is on public display. So we have this immense storehouse above that people are not always apprised of, don't know about, and don't have the opportunity to see. We are continuing to work to make our collections more visible and accessible to the broader public because it's such a remarkable educational tool. But by the same token, they have certainly a great value, so it has to be in kind of a controlled way, and we're trying to operate with demonstrations in paleontology, and we have several public spaces within the museum where you can go and watch them cleaning skeletons or doing that type of thing. But our research is just so important, and then we wind up studying in Peru the issue of global warming and the effect on plant life in the world, and we were instrumental in Neil Shubin's discovery of the fish with feet. I don't know if you read about the footed fish, and so that has been one of the more recent discoveries that the museum, along with the University of Chicago and others, have participated in. And they make it possible for our Women's Board and any other interesting people to travel with these curators to gain another depth of understanding. In addition, we're on a large fundraising campaign right now, which is hopefully going to conclude successfully within another year. And we built, with the help of the state of Illinois and a lot of very generous donors, 180,000 additional square feet of underground storage, primarily for our anthropology collections and very large items. And that sits right out here on the north, underneath the north side of the museum. So we have the opportunity to take care of many more artifacts. We receive about 500 new specimens every single day here at the museum. And so keeping up with that and cataloging that collection and it is very important and is very time-consuming and very expensive.
Now, you were concerned about not being prepared. You're doing great. But one of the other things about this place that I find so magical is, you see the kids and the families going through here at any given time. The inspiration that this place gives, you can't put a value on it.
No. It's a storehouse for children. There are many museums where children have to be taught to appreciate what they're seeing. But one can walk into this museum and see Sue in the middle of Stanley Field Hall, and one's imagination just begins to run wild. Sue has become the icon for our museum, and it's funny that she's only, 15 years old, or I don't know, can't remember exactly, but when you think that our museum, is well over 100 years old, that we have many icons. We have, and when a child walks in and sees a family of deer in a lovely woodland setting, and one that they can really look at and study and appreciate without having the deer run away as they would in a zoo, and not to denigrate zoos or anything like that, but it's really a thrilling time for children to learn about our natural habitats.
What I love about the field is it's so accessible. The kids can walk right up to Sue. They can walk up to so many different things.
Yes, they can. We have, I mentioned the collections also. One night a year we have a members' night here at the museum where I think we have between 1,000 and 1,500 people that we take into the bowels of the museum to these collections that I was telling you about. And there are wonderful drawers and drawers of stuffed birds and all kinds of bugs and beetles, and just absolutely magical for young children as well as adults to learn about.
I was able to go backstage, so to speak, a few years back when Sandy Boyd was awarded the laureate, and I was just blown away by what was back there. We saw a fish that was like 97 million years old. The way that they found a new technique to bring this fossil out, it looked like it might have been a week old.
Yeah.
It was just amazing.
Yeah.
The field, of course, is, as someone who comes from an educational background, as a teacher, former teacher, you can appreciate all that the field does in terms of educating young children. I'm sure that there are a lot of programs in schools all throughout the state of Illinois and around.
Absolutely. We do a tremendous job of outreach. I think we have roughly 300 to 400,000 children from the public schools come into the museum every year. and do a lot of work of reaching out into the neighborhoods as well. We have special vitrines and boxes that can go into the schools as an adjunct to a teacher teaching a particular subject matter. We have lots of opportunities for teachers to do study sessions within the museum to broaden the scope of their understanding of biology or botany or whatever they might be teaching in their schools. And certainly then we have unlimited numbers of field trips here.
How does the field fit into the quality of life of a world-class city like Chicago?
Well, certainly the whole issue of museums and elective dollars and leisure time is a very big issue that museums are dealing with today. If a family of 4 is going to spend a Saturday together, certainly one of the richest experiences they can have is to go to a museum. But there are many things that enter into that. You go to any institution and you have to park and you have to have lunch and you have to do this and that and the other thing. So we are constantly vigilant about making it financially accessible for people to come to our museum, and all museums are cognizant of that. But you want it to be not a stagnant experience, not an experience where you just kind of come in and look at cases and read signs and make it kind of a stiff, unalive experience. We're realistically competitive with the movie theaters, and we're competitive with live zoos, and we're competitive with every other kind of an activity that a family would take together. And so we have to be constantly vigilant about making this really a lively and valuable experience.
I do want to drop back a little bit. Now, Sue was brought here when you were chairman of the board.
Actually, I can remember it so well. John McCarter had just become our CEO, and I followed very swiftly thereafter as the board chairman. And this opportunity had presented itself, and it was really one of the first issues that I had to kind of lead the discussion on, as far as whether or not we would take this leap of faith to purchase Sue. And as you probably know, it was the first time a dinosaur had ever been auctioned off at auction, and so there was a wonderful story that surrounded it, and a lot of mystery and intrigue, et cetera, from learning how to actually go to an auction house and auction off a dinosaur. But we had wonderful support from the corporate community and McDonald's and Disney and others that were private donors, and so we were able to come up with the right amount of money to win the bid to bring this wonderful specimen to the museum. At the time, I was out in Phoenix, Arizona, at a wedding of close family friends, and I was awakened in the morning because it was 10 o'clock in New York, and it was whatever it was, 7 or 8 and 2 or 3 hours in Phoenix, and they awakened me, and I believe it was Jim Croft on the other line, our vice president of finance, who said, "Well, you're the proud mother of a new dinosaur." And that was how I found out that we had this great specimen coming to the museum.
Well, Sue is truly a superstar here.
She is.
And with the type of events that you bring here and exhibitions that you bring here, the King Tut exhibits, of course, are world famous for what you've done. You've always got, this is always center stage for the biggest thing in town. It's amazing. You always seem to be able to draw people from all over the world around here because you're so selective and so careful with what you do as far as your exhibitions.
Absolutely. Well, you know, our New Americas exhibit is, I don't know if you've seen it, but it is just superb. We are blessed with an amazing design team and exhibition team at the museum, which is another whole floor in this building that people don't even realize exists. We have these wonderful creative minds constantly thinking about how they're going to make this museum come alive. And in addition, we have The Evolving Planet, which is a brand new exhibit which is redesigned for our dinosaurs and the beginning of time and so on. So we have 2 exceptional new permanent exhibits that are bringing so many thousands of people into the museum right now that are great educational tools. And so I'm very proud that we've been able to bring them on stream.
How long was your tenure as chair?
3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what span of time? I know 98 was Sue was here in 98.
That
before?
I am so terrible on dates. I just lose track of time. I know that, let's see, it must have been 90 something. I'm trying to think that Miles White is 2 years, and then Marshall was 3. That's 5, and Ron Gidwitz was. You're not recording this, are you?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry.
And it must be about 12 years, I think, ago. So that would be 2006, 96, early 90s, I think.
Strategically thinking, when you were chair, what were the strategic directions you wanted to take the museum? What were the things that you wanted to do? Obviously, Sue was a very big moment in that time. But what were the kinds of issues and challenges you faced, and where you thought maybe the museum could grow?
Well, actually, during my tenure, I said to John often tells this story, I said to him, I think we need a strategic plan. And no, we don't need a strategic plan. We can just, we know what we want to do, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, we realized that we were going to do a strategic plan. And probably, other than Sue, which was kind of serendipitous in a lot of ways. I didn't go out and find Sue. But it was serendipitous that she came, but that we spent a long part of my tenure doing a long-range plan for the museum and the direction we wanted to go. Initially, actually, there was discussion about the fact we had so many collections that were so important, we had no place to put them all. And at one point, we were determining, would we have off-site storage, as many museums do, and would we, even perhaps because of the vastness of the educational experience, would we like to do satellite experiences around the Midwest or whatever? There were just millions of wonderfully exciting ideas, and it engaged every one of our curators to think creatively about what they wanted their particular department to do. And I said, and each curatorial department had an X number of trustees on that committee, 3 or 4. And I said, by the end of this study with this particular department, I hope all of you will be on a first-name basis, that you will know each other well, and that it won't just be an exercise, that you really will think creatively about the direction you want this to go. Well, out of that came, first of all, the decision that we were a great museum, and we wanted to continue to be the great museum we are right here and become the best museum in the world. And so then that decision to build that underground storage, which was an extremely progressive kind of a thing to do, not to build that storage to accommodate all of these enormous collections, and then to decide, the order in which we would rehab a lot of these great halls we have. This Americas exhibit is extremely important because it addresses Central America, South America, and as you well know, here in Chicago, our Spanish-speaking community is growing exponentially and have a vested interest in these communities, as do we. And we have remarkable collections and remarkable opportunities for the various communities to come together and to have discourse. And we work very hard to bring in people from every quarter to advise us and to help us when we're building an exhibit. And so this became a very important hall for us to build. And then, that's, I guess, about it.
What would you say would be your most significant accomplishment while you were chair?
Well, I guess because I don't really like to take credit for Sue. It was lucky that Sue came, and it meant that I had to lead the decision to buy Sue, et cetera. But I think probably the long-range plan, because it was the long-range plan that led us to the decision to have this capital campaign, the largest capital campaign we've ever had, led us to do some of these projects that we're doing right now, but that was the guide. And so I guess I would have to say that long-range plan.
And having a plan in place helps you when there are issues like 9/11, when all kinds of problems happen for the philanthropic community and the
Right.
community.
Right.
Yeah. There are a lot of other things, of course, that you're involved in here in the Chicago area, Northwestern University, University of Chicago. One of the things I want to touch upon is Chicago Community Trust, which does wonderful work around the city of Chicago. Tell me about your involvement there.
Well, I was on the executive committee for 10 years. When you're asked to serve on the executive committee, you're one of 13 people on the executive committee. They may have enlarged that. I'm not sure, because it's been a long time since I was on the executive committee, and here I am with my dates not up to speed. But it was really one of the most exceptional experiences. I don't know how to weigh all these great experiences, because there's this whole other area of children and disenfranchised children. But the trust, the community foundation movement has grown exponentially over the last 15 years. There are community foundations growing all over the country, and they are so important. People don't realize how important a community foundation is to the fabric of a city, because when the Chicago Community Trust decides to invest in a given entity, whether it's a museum or a social service agency or whatever, it's sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval. They have exceedingly astute and qualified staff to evaluate the quality of various things going on in the city, and they really are about the first usually to make, for example, in a capital campaign or some kind of a project, a grant. And I learned there are so many different areas at the Trust of social services and the arts and community projects, et cetera, and it was like getting a PhD in community. It was just the most amazing educational experience to learn how philanthropy can make such an impact on not only individual organizations but the fabric of an entire community, and how it can impact it in perpetuity. Sometimes people, give to a specific project or something like that, but when an individual gives money to the Chicago Community Trust out of there, do you know how the community foundation movement started?
Well, I know a little bit about it. We actually have one in Carbondale.
Well, it started in Cleveland, Ohio, because there were individuals that were leaving vast amounts of money in their wills and saying, I want you to give my money to charity, period. And these banks were sitting with these huge amounts of money, and they were not in the business of giving money away. They just didn't know what to do with it. And so they started a community foundation, the purpose of which was that people that wanted to be sure that there was stewardship on their gifts in perpetuity, a community foundation would give it away. And they had the opportunity or the right to say, my interest is health care, and for the next 150 years or whatever, I hope that you'll just give to health care, or I care about children or whatever. And so it made a really gave a focused opportunity for individuals to give their money away in their wills. Nowadays, people can begin much earlier, as I know you know, with donor-advised funds, et cetera, et cetera. But in the beginning, it became, the movement started because of bequests.
Well, I saw their video last year and actually working on a piece with William Osborne from Northern Trustees.
Yeah.
And wow, it was amazing. All the different programs, from the arts to community centers to theater, working with the disabled. It's an amazing.
The Northern Trust was the first company or corporation to make a huge gift to the Chicago Community Trust, $1 million it was, and this was 15, long time, in honor of their 100th birthday, I think it was. That was how they chose to celebrate their birthday. It was a very important thing to show the corporate community that this is one way that they could be responsive to community needs through a community foundation.
I was really struck by what that corporation has done in terms of stepping forward.
That's right.
To make a difference.
That's right.
You mentioned, of course, a little earlier your work for disenfranchised and disadvantaged children. I knew about that. Tell me a little bit more about the areas you've been working in.
Well, it was really the first thing I ever became involved in when I was bride, I really had never done a lot of community service. I was 28 years old or 29. And Natalie Heineman, who is now well up in her years, but remains the most loving and giving mentor I've ever had in my life, invited me to go on the board of Chicago Child Care Society, which is the oldest child welfare agency in Illinois. Originally, they were the Chicago Orphan Asylum and were an orphanage, but then in the early 30s or the 40s, I believe, they closed the orphanage and just started serving in foster care, adoption, teen pregnancy, etc.
Was this part of the old Chicago Foundling Hospital?
No.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, no.
I have a late friend who was involved with that.
Yeah, there are a number of agencies like ours. Children's Home in Aid of Illinois. They all started. Child care started in 1849. There was this huge cholera epidemic, and many children lost parents, and so they opened many of these orphanages, and it actually happened quite a bit around the country. But child care was the first one. The old orphan asylum building is still down on the south side, and but then eventually they closed the orphanage because that whole movement went out of favor, and went into foster care, and we went into teen parenting and adoption and family counseling and a full range. But as I've always said, and I said earlier in this interview, when one participates, eventually one becomes knowledgeable about what the issues are, and one begins to care. So from that point on, I went on the United Way board, and I was on the United Way and worked on the United Way for 25 years. One way or another, I was on the board of directors and in various committees, etc. And so that just broadened my scope. And then Chicago Child Care Society was a member of the Child Welfare League of America, which is sort of it's a membership organization for all the quality child serving agencies in the country, and does the advocacy in Washington and publishes all the great work in child welfare, etc. So I was asked to serve on that board, and then I became subsequently president of Chicago Child Care. Then I went on the Child Welfare League board in Washington, and I was on that board for 15 or 18 years, and I went on to be chairman of the board in Washington, the Child Welfare League board in Washington. And then you really get a picture of the whole nation and the issue related to having so many children that need a helping hand. And so it became a part of my heart, and continues. But I haven't been involved with the League for a long time, except that I still work in the Chicago area on the Child Welfare League. It's a great organization and was formed during the Teddy Roosevelt administration. It's one of these organizations that they said if it wasn't founded, you'd have to found one, or if it didn't exist, you'd have to create it. And it's a very important national presence and a voice for children across the country.
One of the things that's, having worked on this program over the years and talked to a number of folks who've been involved in civic life like yourself, I get the impression that Chicago is a huge city, but it's a small city in some respects because people can pick up a phone, call somebody, we have a need over here, what do you think you can do? You call somebody else. And so much can get accomplished here with just the personal relationships.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that where that begins is in the corporate community. I think our corporate community is knitted together unlike any corporate community in the nation. That is where a lot of and we also have a history of responsible citizenship on the part of corporate leaders, and they kind of are expected to give in one way or another to Chicago, not only of the resources that they might have as a company, but of their own ability to lead or help with some movement or another. Our Olympics is a classic example. My goodness, I mean, here we all are on pins and needles right now. I'm giving away the timetable here, waiting to hear, whether we really will be fortunate enough. But even if we aren't, it has been such a demonstration of community spirit. Chicago just has a spirit. I have friends in New York that have said, there's just no way that we could do something like that. It's so fragmented and it's such a big city, and so people look on with pride, almost as much pride as Chicagoans do of their own city. There's just a remarkable spirit here.
What's that say about this city?
It says, first of all, we should get the Olympics, I think. But secondly, it just says we aren't an arrogant city. We are a city that just wants to be better, for our citizens and create a climate and a sense of community where people want to live, and that they can educate their children, and that they can have nice family lives and have recreational facilities, all the things that a great city can provide. I don't think it's anything beyond that. I mean, if we can just sustain that and build on that, what else can one offer? I mean, we're here for the people who live here as a city, and we serve the citizens as a city. I'm the royal we, whoever that is. We have great leadership with the mayor, I think, and we're just very lucky to have a kind of a remarkable climate here. Our Chicago Humanities Festival, now 12 years old, another thing I've been involved with and have a great passion for. There's an example where New York has said, it's amazing that you've been able to create 2 solid weeks of these remarkable learning opportunities and lectures for only $5 a piece, for anybody in the community to come for 2 solid weeks. It's just an amazing thing.
Now, this happens at multiple sites, doesn't it? It happens all over.
It does, but the multiple sites are accessible to each other. It's 2 solid weeks, the first 2 weeks in November, and this year the subject is climate of concern. We're dealing with the global warming issues, et cetera, and they have there are lectures that are at the Newberry Library. You can come to lectures at the Field Museum, any place basically that has an auditorium or a place where you could have people speaking on their area of expertise. And you will find yourself, I find myself on a Saturday hopping in a cab and going to the 9 o'clock lecture at the Harold Washington Library and the 10 o'clock lecture at the Field, and you exhaust yourself, but it's just it's a groaning board of richness, it's just fabulous.
Like I said earlier, I don't think we had any problem with preparation. You've done a fabulous job. Just to sum up, you've given so much, but you seem to have received so much from the volunteer efforts that you've had over the years. What's been the most satisfying thing for you about your involvement here?
Just the opportunity to be a community participant, to just know what's going on, to care about what's going on. You have to participate before you can care, And so I don't take any credit for any of it. I have a lot of energy, and I love to learn, and I love to serve. And so in these opportunities for volunteerism have selfishly, I feel, broadened my understanding of our society and our city and the needs that we all hope that we can meet.
Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much.